Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, nous allons reprendre.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to start with this afternoon session. Thank you very much for your kind attention in advance. And if you're listening and watching us live on the different platforms, I really wanted to tell you that we're absolutely delighted to welcome so many people. We got the figures for this morning. There were 4,000 of you following this discussion, 2,500 on Facebook, 500 on YouTube. If you're still around, thank you very much for attending this meeting. As you can see, I take your questions very willingly. I ask these questions to the different speakers. So we're taking care of that. So we had two discussions this morning, and we'll have two very rich discussions this afternoon on subjects that we've already touched upon this morning. And of course, they are of the essence, these topics, especially here in this region. So this afternoon, we'll be talking about fisheries and tourism, and we will also talk about the migration flows. I'm sure that you will have a great deal to say. So we were going to start this afternoon, as we should, with a video presentation by the ambassador of the UK to France, Sir Edward Llewellyn. So Edward, over to you, sir. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, dear participants, I would like to thank you very much for your kind invitation, even though I'm very sorry not to be able to be amongst you in person attending the conference today. This week, there was a very sad event in the United Kingdom with the death of Prince Philip, and I would like to thank you wholeheartedly for your kind messages of condolences which we have received. We received condolences from you and your fellow men here in France. The prince was, of course, a great friend of France. He grew up in France, not far from Paris, and he also was with the Queen several times during his state visits to France. And we will miss him a lot on both sides of the channel. It is indeed an honor for me to participate in this conference today. Again, not in person, but in a virtual format. I was lucky enough to come to Le Touquet a few years ago in order to celebrate an anniversary with the United Kingdom. The city of Le Touquet has always welcomed British citizens very wholeheartedly, and I really like this city. And it is indeed a pleasure for me to be an honorary citizen of the city of Le Touquet. We are eagerly awaiting for the time where the British and European tourists will be able to travel freely, to spend their vacation on the Opal coast. But over and beyond what I have to say about Le Touquet, we have all of the areas in France that embody the diversity of the country, and we have very strong ties between our two countries when it comes to security, trade, fisheries and tourism. Our local as well as national cooperation is absolutely essential. Today's conference will look into the consequences of the Brexit, of the exit of the UK from the United Union. What are the consequences for France in particular? For us, let me be very clear on that. We're talking about a new chapter of our history, a fresh start. Since January, the trade and cooperation agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom provides a new framework for our relationship. Of course, this will lead to very significant changes for our fishermen, our carriers, our companies, and sometimes this will lead to friction, granted, because it will take time to adjust and adapt to this new relationship. Our exit from the European Union meant that we had to somewhat change the conditions of access of fishermen to British waters, and we are really aware of the consequences for the sea products industries and for French fishermen. The agreement that we managed to strike actually factors in this increased sensitivity and the interests of European fishermen. And we will have an adjustment period, a transition period that is foreseen in order to adapt and adjust to the new conditions. This agreement also ensures the continuity of our economies and will help and support companies, and they will engage and continue to engage in a deep and in a deep and very close cooperation relationship despite the pandemic. Our team have worked relentlessly at the borders in order to prepare for our exit from the European Union, in order to reduce and mitigate impact on the flows across the channel. The freight activity is now back to normal. This business continuity was maintained thanks to the incredible cooperation that emerged between the border forces, customs authorities, the prefecture, the DRAF, and their British counterparts. Because of the work they've done, we know that this route is the best possible route across the channel to the United Kingdom and to the European Union. Now, trade flows are also based on local initiatives, and we're very proud to be able to support these local initiatives. We have, for example, the partnership between the Caen County Council and the Pas-de-Calais Département, now joined by colleagues from Belgium and from the Netherlands as well. In addition to this, in addition to encouraging the trade links that enrich our economies, we also take very seriously the responsibilities that we have when it comes to joint security and safety. We've invested several €100 million in order to beef up and strengthen safety and security at the cross-channel ports of Dunkirk and Calais and at the Eurochannel site. We've also funded the creation of a joint task force for better sharing of intelligence on both sides of the channel in order to dismantle illegal immigration networks. Our Home Minister announced recently some more stringent measures in order to restrict access to our asylum system for illegal immigrants, those who have set out to cross the channel illegally. It is sometimes said that the British system is very welcoming, and this is not true. This is what smugglers are saying. It is in our interest to strengthen this cooperation that will protect lives and that will strengthen the security of our respective countries. So this is a new chapter that has opened up in January. It is a fresh start. It is a new opportunity for both of our countries. More than ever, in this troubled period of a pandemic, we have to work closely together across all areas, as friends, as allies, and of course, as neighbors, in order to build a better future. My team here at the embassy is available to you to help you if you wish to discuss more in detail some of the subject matters that will be discussed in the course of today. I wish you very constructive and fruitful exchanges this afternoon, and I would like to thank you very much. Long live the French, English, British friendship. Okay, so these were the words of the British ambassador in Paris. I think he deserves a round of applause on your part. So Edwin Llewellyn, double L, as Gaelish, is from Wales. I'm British, I don't really speak the language, but Llewellyn, I think, is the right pronunciation. Double L. So we will talk about topics that have already been mentioned in this first presentation. We'll talk about fisheries, we'll talk about tourism. May I be very frank with you, because we've exchanged a lot in writing. I was giving a sort of a list and some pictures, but having a hard time knowing who is who. So raise your hands whenever I quote your names, okay? So it's going to be easier. Bruno Marcol, you, Bruno Marcol. So Bruno Marcol is the president of the Coopérative Maritime Étaploise. Then we have Vincent Herbert, you're a geographer, university professor, head of the Research Institute. It's tourism education. Jean-François Rapin, senator, president of the European Affairs Commission of the Senate. I had seen you yesterday, so I know who you are. Frédéric Le Tur is the mayor of the city of Arras. You're a regional councillor, and you're the president of the Hauts-de-France Attractiveness Mission, in charge of regional tourism and convention committee. We also have with us David Sagna. Actually, he's not with us. David Sagna, are you here? Yes, you are. Sorry. No, David Sagna is not here yet. Okay, well, if he wants to sit in my place, he can. And then we have Charles De Bruyne, who's the director of Golfe du Touquet. I think I haven't left anyone out, have I? Pierre Ducrot. Remember Pierre Ducrot? Yes, of course, Pierre Ducrot. I thought you were going to come in the morning. I announced your name. I was really enthusiastic and really was eager to welcome you. Pierre Ducrot, who's the mayor of Montreuil, and he's an entrepreneur, businessman. So once again, thank you very much. If you want to send in your questions, do not hesitate. We'll take them. You saw this morning, you need to talk amongst yourselves. That's probably the most interesting part. The panel discussion and the Q&A sessions are interesting. So, take some time to make some introductory comments, but for about 4 minutes. So we'll have a quick tour de table, as we say in French, and then we will discuss this all together. The alternative would be for everyone to speak for about 15 minutes, and at the end, there would be no time for questions and for a discussion. So let me start with you then. Bruno Marcol, President of Coopérative Maritime Étaploise. You're interested in fisheries. That's your topic, right? Could you tell us in just 4 minutes, could you introduce the topic? And of course, you'll be able to develop the subject further later. Yes, thank you very much. Let me say that I own a vessel, 24-meter vessel with my sons. So where do we stand today? Xavier Bertrand just told us that out of 120 boats who are covered by the jurisdiction of the Hauts-de-France, only 22 have the right license, 12,000 license. And this is really key to secure this kind of license for the local fishermen. They have to go through the Strait of Calais, and there are only 17 nautical miles between our borders. So it is really key to secure this license for fishing on the fishing grounds. So an interim report. At this stage right now, we have no visibility whatsoever when it comes to the total admissible catches and quotas for 2021. And we're very worried about the positions of the UK, technical points that, technical issues for the years ahead. I mean, we should probably have ceilings of catches for species that are not covered by the quotas. Now, mathematically, if they will have 25% drop in the quotas over the next 5 years. So do the math. You should have to reduce by 25% the size of the fleet so that, it matches the available resources for Europeans. So reducing it by 25%. Except that today we have Brexit, we have the COVID crisis on top of that. And of course, this has had quite an impact on us too. We need to support these people. We need to help the fishermen's community so that they can weather the storm and go past this crisis. This is the worst that we could have imagined. For me, Brexit is the worst hit for the fishermen. More specifically, of course, for fishermen who are from here, from the Hauts-de-France region. Generally speaking, what can we say? The positive point in Brexit, I think it's a benefit, and I think it's a fresh start. Generally speaking, we have to succeed. We really have to improve our relationship with the European Commission in general. We have to get out of the current system. The European Commission wants to save fish. The member states want to save their fishermen, right? And today, we need some air. We need some breathing space for people. Reforms are raging on and are being introduced all the time. And it's very important that people become aware, that the European Commission become aware that they need to protect us. British voters, 96% of British fishermen voted in favor of Brexit. Why is that? Well, because the common fisheries policies, the CFP, is not good for them. And we'll agree on that. There are some absurd policies out there, and I hope that Brexit will move things forward and make them aware of this. Thank you very much for having expressed your point of view. It was very clear and to the point. I think we've all understood. Vincent Herbert, you're a geographer and a university professor. What is your take on things? Yes, thank you very much. Well, on my side, from my side, on a personal level, I'm very confident when it comes to tourism. This is not the case for fisheries, obviously. There's a word that we often use when we talk about COVID crisis. We talk about resilience. When we see the development of tourism in the 20th century, we see that at every crisis, tourism has always recovered from these crises to the point that it's always improved and increased up until the financial crisis in 2007. Correct me if I'm wrong. There was a slight drop worldwide in 2007, and then tourism was back in a big way. There were some tourist attacks in France and in other countries where systematically this had an impact on tourism. We thought it was the end of it, and all of a sudden tourism picks up again. Today, we also have the COVID crisis, and it's not behind us yet. We're not out of the woods yet. Brexit became official last year, and then came COVID. So in terms of attendance by tourists, we need some time to know what the impact will have been. I'm confident, however, in the recovery of tourism. The question is, how can we adapt and adjust to the crisis and to what happens after the crisis? I'm a geographer, so I'll be talking about areas that are visited by tourists. Locally, I think that there are some expectations. And I looked at the different statistics. For me, there are issues of scale that need to be looked at, questions of borders, how can we cross them and so on. There are very different situations between the Hauts-de-France, where we are located, and the rest of France. In some regions, in some departments, the impact would be greater because there are more British residents in Dordogne, for example, or in Normandy, or possibly Brittany. So these regions will be more impacted by the departure of the Brits. What about the coast and the regions right behind the coast and the rural areas behind the coast? The conditions, of course, are very different, because on the coast, we know that we are faced with these issues of seasonality. In Le Touquet, certainly, we feel the seasonal effect. It's the city with the 4 seasons. That's what it was called. We feel the 4 seasons. And there is a strong divide, I think, between the north of Boulogne-sur-Mer and the south in terms of tourist attendance. The public, the tourists are not the same. We welcome a lot of Belgian tourists who come to enjoy, our coast, which is a bit more hilly than it is probably than in the flat country of Belgium. So there are different kinds of tourists according to the regions. And we also need to look at the different sectors involved in tourism. Are we talking about transportation? Are we talking about hotels? Are we talking about duty-free shops? Are we talking about restaurants, hotels? I think that here we need a lot of work to do to see what will be the actual impact and consequences of the Brexit. Of course, what we want to do is restrict exogenous dependency factors. For example, we might be overly dependent to the exchange rate between the pound and the euro. There could be a loss of purchasing power for the British citizens who might be more reluctant to spend, therefore, in France. What are the assets that we can offer? We have to work on what we have to sell, what we have to highlight. Our heritage, for example, should be brought to the fore. Historical heritage, natural heritage, it's also very rich. We have our tourist stations also. We have a lot of tools. As a university professor, I'm going to talk about what it is that we do at the university in our research labs, thanks to our youth producing some very useful studies of great quality, not always very known, but that could be useful for our work. And something that was noted that I noted down very recently, we were talking about the very strong relationship between the Brits and the French. The Château d'Ardoloux is working on the Entente Cordiale. And I remember that there's also an association, I think it's called the Traxen Association, working on specific events around the history of the relationships between France and the UK. So I'll stop here, but just to say that I'm very confident, and I think that we'll be able to show a lot of dynamism. We've been able to do that, and we've been able to weather the storm and overcome a number of crises in the past. Thank you very much. David Sagnard is actually with us. He's the CEO of the Carpentier Company. He's a carrier in Calais. He is not attending in person. He's attending remotely. He's on his own. I mean, it feels like he's on his own in his office. He's not really. So we're looking at you, and everybody is saying just a few words, 3 or 4 minutes, and we're very happy and delighted to have you with us. I saw you yesterday, Jean-François Rapin. You were talking about the Fisheries Commission. You're president of the European Affairs Commission at the Senate. What is your initial take on issues related to fisheries? I know that the discussion is very complicated, and having followed what you had to say, I know that it's even more complicated than I thought. Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I think that we have a lot of very significant players and major stakeholders around this table, and I'll try to be up to your expectations. As I said, I'm the president of the European Affairs Commission of the Senate, but I was also in charge of following up on the Euro-British relations at the Senate in the wake of the Brexit. So there are a few elements that sometimes prevent us from sleeping at night. And you were mentioning some of these elements. We had a roundtable discussion yesterday at the Senate on fisheries. Fisheries, of course, is a point of concern. We're very worried about their situation, and fishermen are, really calling upon us to help them. I'll have a political take on this matter. But I think that politics and businesses go hand in hand. We know that there are some entrepreneurs out there. Their raw materials, the raw materials with which we work, are in the sea, and they no longer enjoy the same access rights as were promised to them prior to the Brexit. I'm sorry, who had promised them that they would have access to the fishing grounds? Well, we had a lot of ministers over the last few months. They came to the region. The prime minister came here in person and in front of us, in front of the fishermen, said, you will get your licenses and you will be able to gain access to the British waters just like in the past. There might be a few quotas here and there, but access will be granted. Brexit was a democratic choice. It was a British choice, and it has to be enforced, of course, as such. Could I just say something at this junction? It may not be my role, but I always want to react and respond. It's very close to my heart. I was really touched very deeply by this. Every time we say that it's a democratic vote, let me say this. There are some Brits who live in France, and we had no voting right. We are British citizens. We were deprived of our votes. We could do that. So we got what? An answer 51.9% in favor. If they had given a voting right to British citizens living abroad, possibly the answer would have been no to Brexit. I didn't have a voting right in this referendum. So I beg to differ if you say that this is a democratic decision. Let me just say this at least once. If it had been 2/3 in favor, 1/3 against, it might have been a different story. But anyway, it's a democratic vote. And since there's an electoral rule that has been set, it has to be enforced and respected. And it is respectable. The Conservative Party had said that they would give a right to vote to expatriates prior to the Brexit. It's not against you. Just every time we say it's a democratic vote or the outcome of a democratic vote, I beg to differ. Anyway, a decision was made, but we understood immediately what would be, the consequences of this vote. We knew that it was going to be a lose-lose, not a win-win, but a lose-lose situation. So the issue of fisheries is really tragic, and we will go more into that later. There are two subjects in fisheries. First of all, the subject mentioned by Pierre Margollet. He was talking about access to English fishing grounds, free access, even though the quotas are limited now. And there's a second topic, which has to do with compensation of the fishing companies. They are covered, by temporary cessation of work, but they should be covered even more in the future. Europe has decided to set up a Brexit adjustment fund specifically to support these companies, not just the fishermen who suffered from this situation of transition to the Brexit.
As it stands, France, and by France I mean the government and the parliament and also the companies themselves, are not covered sufficiently by this compensation fund. This means that we have to come together. We have to link elbows and work alongside the Commission to make sure that this financing is properly provided. It's not acceptable that our fishing companies that are suffering today because of this situation allow France to be third in the queue for these funds. That simply isn't acceptable. So we need to fight so that the funding, the compensation, is properly sent to the right people, and that is going to be difficult to achieve. We're looking at 4 and 5 billion euros that have been made available, but when you're splitting a cake, some people get more and some people less, and some, at the moment, France is getting less. It's important to rectify the situation because we're not talking about one or two fishing companies here. We're talking about more than 100 different companies. But the future is important as well. Are we going to stay in this situation? Are we just going to accept things as they are, saying, okay, the British are in this quite difficult situation to understand with this so-called grandfather clause that sets fishing rights between 2012 and 2016. It was extremely perilous to even play with it. I don't know who set up the trap, but there was definitely a trap there. Because we know that this has completely stopped business for some people. We still have a lot of questions on what has happened in the past and what will happen in the future. This isn't just about looking towards 2026 with an amended agreement and adjusted quotas and looking again at the ocean access. It needs to be sorted out now. And remember that the British people are our friends, but if they are not willing to adhere to the agreement as decided on, as ratified in a few months, in a few days, that's simply unacceptable. And as Michel Barnier said, there are some measures that could be brought into force in 2026. Maybe we should consider using them now. It's unacceptable that British fishermen can come into our waters, fish our waters, set their own quota species, quota and non-quota species, and start fishing species that were the daily bread of our fishermen in France. So that's the problem. And if we can't find a solution to this, it's going to be a fishing war. I'm going a little bit over time, but I know that you took a little bit of time as well. People often discuss the agreement for the British Isles, saying that things go relatively well, but nobody ever talks about the French situation. I was able to talk about it at the European Commission. I remember that I was a little bit confrontational with the European Commissioner, but it's important to speak out about this situation that cannot continue as it is, and I'll come back to it later if I can. Yes, and I watch British TV, and I'm from Cornwall myself. I grew up in Cornwall, and I only see reports in England about the British fishermen who are losing their jobs as well. They lost everything as well. So it just seems to have been a tragedy for everyone. To illustrate, we've always been told that fishing is a very small part of the overall agreement, but there are two countries that stopped their European procedures, and that was Iceland and Norway, and they stopped wanting to join the EU because of fishing. Frédéric Le Turc, you are the mayor of Arras. Do you want to tell us about fishing, about tourism? Well, I'll leave Jean-François to speak on fishing. I'll let the people who know more about it speak about it in a nutshell, but I know that I have been able to discuss things with the senator recently. And I now better understand the situation that the fishermen have ended up in after Brexit. I'm mainly here to talk about tourism, and I would like to thank you for letting me speak here at Touquet, because tourism is something that can still be seen in a positive light after Brexit at the moment. Now, before I get to my point, I would like to share with you two memories, recent memories. The first memory is from an evening when I went to sleep before the Brexit result had fully been announced. And when I went to sleep that night, it seemed like the Remain was going to win out. And the next morning I woke up, I was traveling for the tourism committee. I was traveling to Beauvais. And when I woke up, I discovered that the vote had been flipped and that Brexit was going to go through. That's my first memory. And I remember how much of an impact that had had on me. I felt that it was some kind of tragedy that we were losing the British in this way. The second thing is back to 2015. Jean-François and myself met at the Regional Hauts-de-France Council, and we had this huge responsibility of bringing together two former regions, Picardy and Nord-Pas-de-Calais, as part of the administrative reform. And we needed to turn the Hauts-de-France, the new region, into a powerhouse for the regional economy. Since 2015, as local council members, we have done our best to mobilize everyone's energy so that we can, on the one hand, provide a tourism offering that meets demand, especially British demand. And also throughout this Brexit period, we have been trying to reassert the value and the reasons why British people who stay with us, live with us, cross the channel and come and spend time in our regions. People come over looking to heal, to relax, to reconnect. And that's something that they can definitely do in the Hauts-de-France region along the coast, but also further inland. And you were right to mention it earlier. If they feel like it, they can even travel all the way south to Chantilly and the Asterix theme park. These are parts of our region in Hauts-de-France. The British account for a large part of foreign tourism in our region, not, of course, during COVID, where everything's kind of on ice. And we believe that they are going to continue to, and in fact, that they do continue to want to travel to France and enjoy our region. And I think that that's something that's very important to underline. We remain determined to understand what our customers want and to meet their needs. The entire tourism angle for our region is well-being, where people can heal, they can recharge their batteries. And we believe that our region can continue to provide that. So once again, I would like to say that we still are in Le Touquet, and we want to continue to assert this region as a place that British people like visiting. Le Touquet has always been an area that the British have enjoyed. And everything we're seeing just goes to show how much British people love coming here. So you're talking about tourism here, but also people who live here. And that can be very different because you've got the 90-day rule now. In our region, we mainly look at relatively short-term tourism. So quite on the contrary, I think that what British people are looking for in our region is something that we can provide at this point. When it comes down to it, what we're interested in is their purchasing power and how much money they want to spend in the region, because in the past what we've seen is people simply traveling through the north of France while going to elsewhere. I think that people are going to end up spending longer in the north of France, and they may spend a little bit more money, which is going to be excellent for the local economy. I completely agree with you because we are both part of the scientific group that works on tourism and tourism needs, and we've been heavily supported by the region. I can certainly see that there is a strong link between the work at the university and also what's being provided by the region. And we are working a lot on the ecotourism angle, which is exactly the same as the kind of thing that we've organized, the recent symposium on slow tourism. And we have got a good overview of what we still need to do. Basically, there are lots of different projects, and part of our training program is to create a network of supply around ecotourism concerns. And COVID, just as for climate change, and the region's working on that as well, and the consequences now, I'm still a geographer, so I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but looking at the reasons why people may spend more time in northern France, which may start to look a lot more like the Atlantic coast in a couple of years, a couple of decades. And I think this is a huge opportunity for people to discover the region, and not just British people here.
Je me retourne maintenant vers David Sagnard, vous êtes PDG entreprise Carpentier Transporteur de...
David Sagnard, you are the CEO of the Carpenter Transport Company in Calais. This must be very difficult for you, working out what is due to COVID, what is due to Brexit, what is here to stay, what is the medium and long-term impact of Brexit. How are things for you? On the 1st of January, the UK left the EU, and it didn't lead to any significant upheaval. The upheaval actually happened due to COVID. But I do have to say that COVID had a number of significant effects on the red tape, the forms that needed to be filled out, and also transit times that increased and transport became harder to organize. Now, Brexit hasn't changed anything with regards toll fees, but we have seen that transport costs have become 10 to 15% more expensive, and sometimes far more expensive for e-commerce related packages. The reason for this increase is the increase in red tape, as I mentioned, and also the drop in productivity for each vehicle. Indeed, as the transit time increases, so the amount of time it takes to take a package from point A to point B, and in some cases that can increase by 48 hours, as is the case for one of my clients, then that's time that the vehicle is not actually traveling, which means that our costs remain the same, but well, our costs go up, but the fees we make don't change. So if I were to compare between 2020 and 2021, this is mainly COVID impact that we've seen. And as Mr. Laballet said this morning, the uncertainties that persist and the last-minute nature of Brexit have led to a kind of rubber banding in cross-border trade. In 2020, compared to the same 2019 period, we had an increase of cross-channel traffic by 30%, whereas at the beginning of this year, we have seen a drop of 24% of cross-channel travel. The drop has mainly been seen in foodstuffs, in the transport of merchandise related to car parts. And in many cases, many people have been storing a lot of things in warehouses because they were expecting a no-deal Brexit and they wanted to avoid a huge increase in taxes from the 1st of January. But now, with the deal, the warehouses are starting to empty, and since the last month, we are starting to see business get back as usual with about plus 8%. But remember that the first lockdown happened in March last year, which means that it's quite difficult to compare March to March like for like. Furthermore, we also handle general cargo. And in general cargo, we have seen an increase in volume of 36% for export and an increase of 27% of our turnover for export. And that's quite paradoxal because for the last 20 years, the road share of cargo going across the channel was about 50% in the 90s, 95 in France, and then it dropped down to less than 8%. So we dropped a lot in terms of French market share for cross-channel transport. the transport environment and the tax environment has become more complex, which means that transporters have either decided to draw down or completely stop their cross-channel traffic. As a Calais-based company, we saw that as an opportunity to claw back some of the market share that we had lost over a number of years. We developed new services to help support people transport things across the border, working with some of our partners at the Calais port, so that we could provide a turnkey logistics solution with a single contact point for our clients. It's something that we prepared for, despite the uncertainties that we did have of whether we should give it a go, whether we shouldn't. We still gave it a go, and now we have import and export customers, and it's great because it increases our offering as well. However, the growth window does seem to be closing at this point because companies are starting to get used to the new environment. We do have an upcoming deadline, which is going to be January 2022, with the implementation of controls on incoming merchandise across the border, and we need to make sure we're organized before that. Today, we're lucky enough to have a tunnel and a port and the coastline. We therefore have a strategic positioning based on the merchandise flows going through the region. But I believe that in the future, the transport system as it exists today is likely to change significantly. It's going to transform even, especially if the transporters continue to base themselves on what they're seeing, which is equipment being stopped at the border. And that could lead transporters to start to look at non-supported business. And I would like to congratulate all of the companies that are developing that kind of service, because it's going to help us as transporters. For my company, the Carpentier Group, we are hoping to get a lot from Brexit. Maybe people may be pessimistic, but I'm quite optimistic. We've invested in logistics warehouses, and we've still got some investment coming up. We've also invested in the equipment fleet that we have. And for 2021, we have an important project, which is to get a foothold in the UK and to have a transport offering which is complementary to what we have based in France. That's the challenge that I'm working on, and that is my outlook for the future, for our region, for the transport companies in our region. I certainly think that there's potential there. Thank you very much. That's an important opinion that we need to flesh out our understanding of this. Moving on to more tourism, where do things stand on tourism? So I represent a golf company, but we also have restaurants and hotels. It's not just about the little white ball. So I work in a sector that is really struggling because of COVID at the moment. Le Touquet and its golf course were built by British people, and that's an asset, and we do have many other assets. It's possible that even COVID today could be an asset for the north of France, because British people who travel a lot may not want to travel as far afield as they did before COVID. They might want to just get in their car and travel to somewhere a bit closer with fewer people, less risk of infection. And that means that we in the Hauts-de-France region might have a competitive edge over other tourism destinations. That being said, and what remains to be seen, is whether administratively those tourism flows can be maintained, because at the moment there's no tourism at all. So we don't currently know whether the tourism system can absorb what may happen with Brexit. So being able to easily cross the channel is one part of the equation, but also the value of the pound is going to be important. We definitely shouldn't hope for the British pound to go down, because that would drive down British people's purchasing power, and that means they'll spend less on leisure tourism. This morning has been about economics, but it's also important for tourism. So just as for Mr. Albert and Mr. Le Turc, I think that we still have a very attractive region. And once time has run its course, the Opal Coast, Le Touquet, and the Hauts-de-France region may come out winner. That's optimistic, that's great. Pierre Ducrot, you are the mayor of Montreuil and also an entrepreneur, which is important for this. So would you like to wrap up this first part for us? Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Daniel Fasquier as well for inviting me here today to be part of these very important discussions about Brexit. I'd like to give you my opinion on Brexit based on my various roles. First of all, as the mayor of Montreuil-sur-Mer. My town has been around for thousands of years and is very attractive to British tourists, but we also have a lot of residents, secondary homes as well. We've got about 300 in the town, 1/3 of which are owned by British people. So there's a lot at stake. So we're talking about resident British people, people who have holiday homes, but who come and spend a lot of time. So they have to comply with the 90-day rule. Yes, they will have to comply with the 90-day rule. Absolutely. So this is a challenge from a free movement perspective of people, but also of their money, of capital, given the difficult environment. It's important to remain vigilant throughout all of this, although I do remain confident and I do agree with what was just said about tourism. I believe that the COVID effect and the impact that we're seeing from infrastructure on motorways and the Eurostar could mean that we can draw in more people and maybe come out ahead. And you shouldn't forget our high quality gastronomy in the region as well, which is very important in Montreuil. If I take a step back and put on my vice chair of tourism for the region hat, so to speak, so Le Touquet, Bercken, Montreuil area. Well, from that perspective, we have 5,200 companies, 80% of which have fewer than 10 employees, and 50% of which are related to the hotel, cafe, and restaurant business. And this directly ties into tourism, of course. Out of this customer base, 40% are foreign in our Montreuil area. And out of that 40%, 60% of the foreigners, therefore, are British. So 25% overall of revenue from hotels, cafes, and restaurants are directly tied to British tourism in our region. And here we're talking relatively high-end tourism. Le Touquet has a Four Seasons, it's got the golf course, it's got some sporting events, and there are other structures and some of the more inland areas that are very attractive as well, with a lot of cultural heritage in Montreuil as well. And it's important to be careful to safeguard that economic activity as we go out of COVID. Of course, at this point, it's very difficult to assess the impact of Brexit itself separate from COVID. In any case, we are working with local authorities and with the CRTC, with Frédéric and Jean-Philippe Gold as well. We are working hard on a strategy for post-COVID and post-Brexit. We believe we're ahead on a lot of new trends within tourism, slow tourism, green tourism, gastronomy, and all of this should help improve our situation. So we have decided to be proactive rather than reactive and make sure that we have an attractive, beautiful region that draws in lots of our British friends. Now, I also head up a company, a medium-sized company that makes equipment for tunnel building for infrastructure projects. And from a company perspective, we have an opportunity, which is the HS2 high-speed line between London and Birmingham in the UK. So this was approved, signed off on by Boris Johnson last summer, 100 billion. Controversial, but we certainly signed up for that tender. And as early as 2018, we heard of the Brexit decision. And in September 2020, we signed a contract for a public tender around London. So as Brexit was raging, we were able to weather the storm, so to speak. And I have to say, I admire how fair play and pragmatic our British friends were in the way they dealt with the contract, because they actually introduced amendments, extra clauses in the contract to protect us against potential negative impact, depending on which way the vote went. And these are issues that we may have had to deal with depending on the decision, because the treaty hadn't yet been decided at that point. So for us, it's a great opportunity. But of course, we're working in a niche business, and there are very few people around the world who are actually able to make this kind of equipment. And this is one of the reasons why the HS2 project called on us. But I do believe that there are lots of opportunities out there for all sorts of companies at all sorts of levels. Any company that has something to contribute, something that makes sense, and something that catches the UK's eye. We've got Daniel in the back who is nodding. He seems to agree with you. Before we move on, just a few questions. We still have 45 minutes of our debate for this particular roundtable, so feel free to send in any of your questions. Let me just play devil's advocate just a few minutes. It's kind of my job. I've heard all of you speak, and it seems to me now, again, this isn't me speaking, this is me playing devil's advocate, but it seems to me that you're all saying that at the end of the day, Brexit happened, and now we just need to get back to business as usual as things were before Brexit. That's, in a nutshell, what some of you have already said. Basically that it's going to be embarrassing for a little bit. Things will be different for a couple of years, and then things will hopefully return to as similar as possible to pre-Brexit. Do you think that's even possible? Because the British are going to reject that idea. They're ferociously defending their rights and their position, especially the Brexiteer crowd. If you tell a hard Brexit proponent that you want things to go back to how they were, they'll say no, even if it means shooting themselves in the foot. Even if it's a bad thing economically for them, this is how stubborn they are, saying, no, we want to regain our sovereignty, even if we lose contracts, even if we lose fishing rights. Why did so many British fishermen vote for Brexit, despite being told that they were going to lose out economically? And they didn't listen, and they voted for Brexit anyway. Do you see what I mean? Everyone seems to be saying, oh, it's just a little hiccup, and then things will go back to normal. Is that really something we can hope for? I think maybe they've been sold something that wasn't really possible, because British fishermen only actually consume 20% of their own fish. And a lot of the fishing rights are going to go back to the European continent. But I would just like to give you a bit more information.
We discovered on the 1st of January that the UK took its territorial waters around Dover again, and that's so hundreds of square kilometers. We have the map here. Well, you can see the dotted line of the former limit of 6 or 12 miles, and in orange, that's the part that they took back. So 6 to 12, it was actually expanded to 18 nautical miles. And some boats on some ships are not going to have the 6-12 miles license, so that means that they will have even less access to the Pas-de-Calais Detroit. Because in their territorial waters, they can impose different technical measures from in the exclusive economic zone. So that has an impact, and we had targeted checks recently, and we were invited to leave the area. And they respected the European, or actually we respected the European technical regulations, but they also knew that they had other rules that they could apply. Well, I think that what you're saying regarding the impression that everyone wants to go back to how it used to be, well, you might think that way, but actually no. An agreement was negotiated, it's going to be ratified. So what we are asking for now is respecting the agreement as it was ratified. On the 1st of January, when ministers go and tell you in 3 days you'll have your licenses, we have to believe that speech. If we don't believe what the minister says, then we can't believe anything. And that means we've lost everything. So we don't want to go back to how it used to be, but we want the agreement to be applied as it was sold, so to speak, as it was negotiated. Because fishermen accepted a decrease in quotas of 25%. The Brits wanted much more than that, but we had an agreement of a 25% decrease in quotas. They accepted it, but they also accepted that because they knew that they would have access to English waters. So that agreement, it's not a treaty, but the agreement, that's what we want to be applied, to see being applied, the agreement. Just for information, are there any winners from Brexit in terms of fishing? No, I don't think so. I don't think anyone's winning from the situation. Everyone will have to adapt. We'll have to adapt our ships. We have to diversify ourselves perhaps in a different way, but we are in a trap. And that's the worst thing that could happen to us. We're talking here about species that are not submitted to quotas, and now they will be under quotas. Since 2014, the environment changed a lot. Before 2014, we were fishing a lot of cod. Today, there's pretty much no cod left in the channel. But we are fishing squid. We are fishing red mullet as well. We're not going to have the figures that we could have had between 2012 and 2016. So that means that we'll have those 50% quotas that we could have avoided. We're talking about 6-12 miles now and about the licenses, but there's also another issue that we haven't mentioned yet. Perhaps it seems a bit more far-fetched, but that issue is unloading in the UK, because we have fishing companies fishing in the north of England. And in the past, they used to unload their fish in the UK, sometimes then going to France through trucks. But today, because of the lack of preparation of the UK to the current situation, they can't unload their fish in the UK because the situation doesn't allow the Brits to receive them and to do the veterinary checks. So they're going to Denmark, and then from Denmark through trucks, from Denmark on trucks all the way to France. Unacceptable. And that means that you need to leave them in fridge for far longer time, and what people are asking for is basically running the industry on a just-in-time basis, like it used to be. And add that in France, in Boulogne-sur-Mer and in Étaples, of course, we have an ecosystem. And everything that's unloaded in Boulogne is important for the Boulogne market. President Bertrand mentioned the marieurs this morning. They are fish traders. Well, I have a question from a fish trader. So we are in an ecosystem. I'll just finish first. And we need the things to be unloaded as they used to be. So unloaded by ships. But I'm looking here at Mr. Sanyard that I know well. And he used to transport fish for his companies. So there's a real ecosystem here of capturing, processing, logistics as well. All of these people are working on these sites. Well, Francois has sent us a question online. It's a long question. The fishing environment is left abandoned. The traders in particular, since 1st of January, there are new rules. The bureaucracy is very heavy. Sorry, I can't read what's written on the card. So we have additional costs to transport our products. That means that a lot of traders stopped trading with the UK. So what subsidies are we going to get? And how can the small companies get those subsidies as soon as possible without having the biggest companies getting the whole bulk of it? So what are the measures for these companies in fish trading? Well, the issue today with the Brexit is that every kilo of fish that's exported to the UK needs a capture certificate. So the fisherman is supposed to send that. But when fish leaves the Boulogne harbor, the boss can't issue that certificate. So how do we do it? So it's complicated to find an agreement here with all the producers. It's a lot of paperwork to send fish to the UK. You mentioned the other boats that used to unload in Scotland and are now unloading in Boulogne. They unload 5,000 tons of fish, and they need to cross the north of the North Sea to go to Alstom in Denmark now. So that multiplies the time by 2. Doubles the time, and it costs a lot of money. It's anti-productive. And there's also the Brexit Adjustments Fund that needs to be adapted to the compensation. And that's a midterm solution? Yes, it's a midterm solution and an immediate help solution, because that was voted as part of the multi-annual financial framework of the European Union. And I think this help is going to be a one-shot fund. So we should also think about sustainable measures, and we need to preserve a full ecosystem. That's really what's important for me. The Boulogne market is 350,000 tons of processed fish and about 30,000 tons of unloaded fish, so 10% of what's processed. So we could say that unloaded fish is not a big part, and we can still save the rest of the market for the processing, but no. There's heritage here involved. It's in people's blood, and that needs to be saved as well. And today, Brexit has a strong impact for all of these people in that ecosystem. And last thing I wanted to raise as well, the situation within the European Union itself, the situation of our partners, of the member states. For instance, the Netherlands or Germany, they are anticipating the issue of having access to English waters. And some of them are going to maybe try and get an English pavilion, an English flag. So what is the future of the French pavilion of the French flag if everyone tries to get the most convenient flag, and that might be the British one? I remember that when I was young, there was a war for fishing between the UK and Iceland was actually winning most of the time. So are we going back to such a situation? Do you think the situation could rotten? Well, that's not the point. We're not trying to fight here. I think that Michel Barnier said it very clearly this morning. We need to find reciprocity. mutual understanding. I don't know what was the term that he used. I think it was a level playing field. Yes, that's what he said. It needs to be fair for both sides. That's what we should reach. We shouldn't just change the rules of the game overnight. And now we are only starting to understand what the new rules are. What was in that agreement that was signed at the end of December with 1,200 pages in it? I think that fishing was the core issue of the end of the negotiations, by the way. Yes, we talked a lot about fishing on the British TV, so much that people watching at the time said, well, that's the only thing we're talking about. And now we can see the result. And I think it's really a symbol. You mentioned the war between, the trade war between Iceland and the UK or the British Isles. Well, it was the same thing. War always comes from the sea. I don't want to be negative. I want to be combative. I want to have a fighting spirit. I don't want to let the situation worsen in the future because we waited 4 months already. I don't want that situation to get even worse, for it to lead to a general bankruptcy. I know that bankruptcy is a strong term, but it's a real term. And what's behind this term? Well, fleet protection plan or destruction plan, and I think that would be completely stupid. The region invested a lot in the harbors in Boulogne and Calais to allow those companies to work in better conditions. Everything has been done yet, but there are efforts being made. So we are investing today in fishing activities, and if you do all of that only to then have a plan to reduce the business in the future, it just doesn't make any sense and it's unacceptable. So that's why we need to fight. Mr. Herbert, you're an academic. Why is it that you think fishing plays such an important role in the construction of a national identity? Because that's really how it was seen during Brexit. They were saying they will not get our fish. That's why we need Brexit. Well, now the result shows that everyone's unhappy. Well, that's a philosophical side of this debate. Yeah, but it's important to understand, because if you get an agreement where no one is happy, it's a surprising agreement. Well, I was supposed to talk about tourism today, but actually I started working on fisheries in the past in Denmark as well. So here, regarding your question, why is there such a strong link between fishing and the national identity? Well, because there's a relationship with the sea as well. There's that identity related to the sea. And here we could talk about philosophy, sociology. I think there's a strong relationship with the sea when you live next to it. We talk about Brittany as saying that it's a land of fishermen. Well, it's the same thing for farming in other regions. And actually, in other parts of Brittany, that same region, it's much more farming than fishing on the other side of the region. So there is definitely a link between national identity and the seas. Is it because France has 3 maritime facades with the Atlantic, North Sea, and the Mediterranean? To play a role. I also worked a lot on the Pas-de-Calais Detroit. Pas-de-Calais Strait. That's a strait that really has an impact on people's daily lives. So a mayor of Ouessant or a mayor of Le Touquet is facing that international space, whose issues are much bigger than the only local issues. But I think that there's really an identity related to where people are living, people's daily lives, beyond the national identity. It's really what makes up their lives. And here, the fishermen have their own territories, and you also use the word territory in French. And fishermen, for example, don't tell others where they go to fish, because that's also part of their territory, their identity. And then I think there's also, of course, issues related to the EU, to politics and sovereignty. And there's also the issue of a national law with the 6 to 12 miles rules, or other rules like Chile had in the past as well, to avoid other fleets scavenging their own resources. It's very interesting, but there's a lot of things to say in a few minutes time only. But it's also irrational, isn't it? I don't know whether you know the story of the seafood or the seafood producers.
Voilà.
Oyster farmers. 90% of them voted in favor of Brexit in Grimsby, which is in the north of England. And 1 year later, they realized that leaving the single market wasn't perhaps the greatest decision to sell their oysters, because most of their oysters were sold on the European single market. So the Grimsby Telegraph said that. I found the article of a few years ago, and I put it in my book because I think it really sums up the ridiculous nature of Brexit. It's preposterous, really, because they were at risk of losing their main market, and they went to Downing Street with a petition. They took selfies of themselves with their petition in front of Downing Street, with a petition asking for their seafood not to have access to the single market anymore.
De toute taxe, etc. Ça vous montre, et ils sont allés se faire photographier devant le 10 Downing Street, fiers de
There was a sound issue. The interpreter did not have any sound.
Nous, on veut, après avoir voté le Brexit, une exception. J'ai une question assez provocatrice d'Élise, qui, enfin,
Another question from Elise.
Et les autres affaires dont nous avons parlé, qui dit en gros, si on ne peut plus prendre les Britanniques, est-ce qu'il ne faut pas investir dans d'autres touristes, faire venir d'autres...
She's saying, if we can't welcome the Brits anymore, shouldn't we invest in other tourists? Shouldn't we be attractive for other kind of tourists, so Belgians, Dutch, Germans, Poles, whatnot? Shouldn't we try and attract more European clients? And couldn't we say, well, they left, too bad for them? Shouldn't we just say, if they don't want to come, well, that's their problem, their loss? So perhaps Dutch people could buy things that the Brits used to buy. Well, that's actually an idea that's not French in its nature, because we need to be pragmatic. We're not going to decide whether we should block or not visitors, whether they come from Britain, Belgium, the Netherlands, China, the United States, or elsewhere. We accept everyone, and our region is international. And our region is really at the heart of Europe. We say that very often, and I think that was really confirmed with the economic development of the EU. And I think we also have to be pragmatic. You said that we had to that we were too optimistic, too positive. No, I think we are just pragmatic. We are integrating that data, and in tourism, We integrate data, and then based on that data, we build a new model to remain attractive, to keep producing hope, so to speak, for what tourists can find in our region, whether they are British or not. It doesn't matter to us. We will be delighted to welcome them, and we still want to be attractive for the Brits. And another point I'd like to raise is you mentioned the holiday homes of the Brits or the Dutch, for example. Well, I think that the Brits who have a holiday home in our region are really attached to our region, and that will be stronger than the obstacles they have to overcome. So I think they will keep coming because they are attached to our region. Then, of course, we will also make efforts to attract other people. There is no problem with that. But generally speaking, we want to remain open and welcoming, and I think that's one of our strengths and states of mind as well. Well, in Montreuil, for the holiday homes, what we noticed is that unlike in 2008, 2009, after the financial crisis, when a lot of Brits left because they were deeply impacted by the crisis, today, after Brexit, we haven't had the same thing happening at all. And as Frederick said, these people are attached to our region, to the values of our region and the quality of life that they're looking for as well, compared to London, for instance. So of course, we don't control the rules of the game when it comes to regulations or borders or taxations. So this is beyond our grasp, but we are implementing all we can to keep attracting our British friends. The question is right. The Brits did make a choice, and we also look, therefore, at other countries. We have a different strategy today. You mentioned the Belgians, especially the Flemish, or the Dutch as well, who sometimes visit the two capes in our region, and we are trying to focus on them as well. It's obvious that if you look at a circle of 200-kilometer radius around the Touquet, well, you're not only in France, but you also end up in the UK, in Belgium, and in the Netherlands. So those will be the main people that we should attract. Well, we didn't wait for Brexit to think that we should try and look for more markets. We knew it was going to come. We had dates, and every time the date was postponed, we noticed either an increase in looking for a new strategy or a decrease. But yes, we definitely focused on the Belgians who in the past used to stay around the north of Boulogne are now going a bit more south to Le Touquet. We also worked on communication. We started working with Belgium in this regard, with the Netherlands as well. We're also trying to target Germany. We thought about looking at a radius not of 200 kilometers, but of 3.5-hour drive, because more than that, it starts being a bit lengthy. And that being said, we can't forget that the Brits amount to 50% of our foreign customers, and they amount to 30% of our turnover. Is it still as much? Yes, it decreased after 2008, and it never got back to the levels of 2008 in our sector. In 2012, there was a slight decrease, but it was otherwise steadily increasing. And we are increasing the amount of Brits that we welcome, but we're still not at the level of 2008. But they are still 25–30% of our customers. So it's important to look at other markets, but they shouldn't be too far away, according to us. We don't have a big enough airport in our region to welcome people from far away. And well, on the other side of the channel, with the tunnel, in 45 minutes, you can have the Brits. Two further questions. What about bilateral relationships? We talked a lot about Europe, but what happens regarding your bilateral relations with other cities, for instance? Language learning stays as well. I know that there are a lot of relations between the different cities internationally. So are those bilateral relationships affected by Brexit? For example, twin towns, twin cities? No, that was not impacted. Relationships go on. We in Arras are twins with Ipswich, and we still have good relationships with them. Well, now, of course, it's through video conference because of COVID, but our pupils, our students, our associations, our companies are still in touch. They are still trying to collaborate. So I have to say that regarding bilateral relationships, I'm quite optimistic because of how history built links between our two countries. We've always had a tumultuous relationship. It's always been a bit difficult. And we see here that there's still reason for hope. And I think definitely that there's more hope in tourism than for fishing, because for fishing, it's more complicated. There, you need more granular negotiations. You need to make sure that you stand your ground, that you fight the right battles. But for tourism, it's not as technical, but the topics are very complex on whether it's tourism or fishing. So we need to try and build on collective intelligence to find the right possible way. In Montreuil, we unfortunately do not have any twinning process with the British town. Unfortunately, I have been mayor of that town for a year now, so we are thinking about that. But because of COVID, of course, we can't go further than a merely thinking exercise for now. But we were also we had the GHQ headquarters in the First World War. We have the statue of Douglas Haig as well, and we are thinking about restoring that site with a ceremony that could happen in September if everything goes well. There was a lot of enthusiasm regarding that in our town and also in the UK to try and have the best possible ceremony regarding this alliance of the First World War. So we want to keep our relationships alive and go beyond that sad version of Brexit, but leading people to look inwards. Would you like to add something?
Well, concerning the university, we talked about this, but we talked about the Erasmus programs amongst students in particular. And it's really too bad that they got out of this program. Let me tell you about my personal experience. I work at the Côte d'Opale University, and I could see that our students wanted to go to England, and we get the feeling, and possibly Mr. Fassé will be able to confirm this, that the English students were looking for universities that were further afield, probably further south. And unfortunately, I wasn't successful. Sometimes I would turn to Eastern countries to offer a double diplomas, Bulgaria or Russia. It could have worked. I approached these universities where the cost of living was relatively low compared to, of course, London or other very prestigious cities, and where our students could follow classes in English. Not always the best of English, but at least it was a way of attending university in a different language. So regarding the Erasmus program, I think we will find other solutions. When it comes to research efforts, we often have joint research efforts as part of the Interreg program, for example. Some of these programs are still up and running. We could work, directly with universities. In the long term, I'm not sure. I don't know what will happen with the Interreg or research programs. Possibly there will be further schemes that will be introduced so that we can, work hand in hand with our fellow researchers and students in England. We will develop further programs. Okay, one last round of questions. I'll start with you, David Seignard. You're with us remotely. in virtual format, and I'm going to all ask you one very simple question. What is it that we should do now in order to improve the situation, in order to fix the Brexit problems that we are faced with now? You have some politicians in this room. This is the best opportunity for you to express your views. People are looking at you, are listening to you. Now, despite the picture that you've painted, Mr. Sagnard, are they concrete things that we must do now in the upcoming few months to fix things and improve the situation, in order to, fix the provisional, the temporary difficulties that are related to Brexit? We haven't been able to understand exactly what will happen, the impact on public transport, on road transport. Well, we will see what happens on the 1st of January 2022, when the Brits are going to start checking the products entering their territory. So that's an important milestone. There's always a fear, of course, that there will be blockages on the road, traffic jams. If there's a congestion at the Dover harbor, of course, this will lead to traffic jams in the French and European ports and harbors. So we don't have that kind of information yet. We will have to wait and see. So what is it that we should do? Probably sort of streamline the procedures and formalities. We shouldn't be more Catholic than the Pope. We shouldn't, engage in difficult procedures. We should smooth out the difficulties to continue developing our economic activities and trade. What are the concrete measures that you would suggest? With the Regional Tourism Committee, we are trying to understand, and that's our priority, what are the expectations of our would-be customers. We need to work on the right segmentation of our products. We need to really make sure that we target very carefully the answers, the responses that we can come up with based on a sound knowledge of the market and customers' expectations. We're already doing that, but we need to segment further. We want to muscle up our effort in a way. We want to do better and go further. What we have done in the region should be further supported. We need to engage in collective work, in teamwork. We need to get together the regional authorities, look at what is on offer with the suppliers. We need to come up with the right packages in order to be relevant to the potential customers, to attract the right customers. We need a good match between the decisions that are made by institutions on the one hand, and the decisions that we need to support in the private sector. So there needs to be a match there between private and public sector. So we need to really close ranks, overcome obstacles, and try not to waste too much time. But the human dimension is probably the strongest asset that will help us weather the storm, overcome a number of obstacles and breaks, and this human relationship will be built over time. It's already very strong between our countries, and I think that with Brexit, it will be further strengthened. We will have to assess, of course, the outcome of these efforts after about 10 years, but never let go of this effort. In a region like ours, we need to continue to diversify our capacity to attract other further customers. And that's what we are going to do. And that's what the different countries are going to do. That's our main asset. A concrete, proposal from your part. Well, I think that we need to get even better acquainted with our customers to come up with the right packages. And this means that we need to engage in communication efforts. We need to develop digital communication resources. In particular, there are some fairs and exhibitions that we attended for years. People would say, okay, I'll go to the World Travel Market in England. Well, maybe that's going to become more and more complicated and obsolete. We need to invest and put a lot of money and hire technicians in order to multiply digital communication campaigns. We need to stick around, to be present, and have some visibility across the channel. On the other side of the channel, we need to be in the UK to bring British customers to France. What about you? Well, I think that we need to stabilize our environment. We have an agreement, which is a very young or recent agreement that has not yet been ratified. As we said, we only just started the learning curve, and we don't have 100% of all the answers across all of the areas. So I think that very quickly, we need to gain some stability. Our British friends would be urged by us to play fair and not to change the rules of the game, because they will have a possibility to do so, to deviate from the rules, especially when it comes to tax matters, money matters, financial matters, etc. So let's urge them to play the game, because we need stability to invest in the future, to make projections for sound industrial investments. We need stable and well-known, well-identified investment environments, and that's why we need stability. This morning, during the panel discussions, I think it was Mr. Barnier who talked to the subject, and others too. They said that in Europe, we needed people to talk. The Brits and the EU should try to join forces to stabilize the conditions. Yes, let me repeat pretty much the same message. We need to strengthen collective and territorial intelligence. We need to play smart. We are at Le Touquet here every year. We have the Innovation and Tourism Weekend that is organized. It's an event that our students take part in. Why not organize the Innovation Tourism Weekend on this issue of what will happen after the Brexit? What can we do through innovation, through the force and clout of our youth? I don't know if you've had an opportunity to participate in this Innovation Weekend, because a lot of interesting ideas emerge from these events, and it's good to be able to count on them. These new ideas that will help us shape new companies, startups, etc. So territorial, collective intelligence, and gateways with other areas, fisheries, for example. We could have projects that straddle across several areas. What could we do with waste management and tourism, etc. We could also, introduce fisheries to people who come as tourists. Again, that too allows us to raise the awareness of people to the usefulness of fisheries. Bruno Margot, what would you say? Well, something I said at the beginning, it bears repeating. I think that we need to give trust to our fishermen. The European Union should be a source of trust for fishermen. Fishermen really contributed to scientific research over the years. They supported research efforts. Today's generations did what they had to do. Now we have to place our trust in fishermen. We have to trust them. We have to send a very strong message across. There are solutions out there. As I said, we have to weather the storm first, overcome the crisis, but there will be solutions out there. They already exist. We could see some absurd situations. Look at sea bass. There was a moratorium in 1994. It may have been necessary, but it was brutally imposed and enforced at the time on sea bass. And so we couldn't land sea bass for 2 years, if my memory is correct. In 2018, the fish stock was not reconstituted 100%, but it was replenished to a large extent, the sea bass stock. Today, we're discarding sea bass, which is an absurd situation, simply because if we were to fish sea bass, now it's part of the bycatches. It's considered as a bycatch, and the proliferation of the species is such that we're fishing more and more sea bass. Here, we're asking for revision of the procedures and rules in fisheries. It's one of the absurd measures, and that's why possibly the British fishermen were against these fisheries policies. So we need to have a longer-term vision on the part of the European Commission. It should let go. They should, give some air. I can't imagine the port of Boulogne without fishermen. There would be a link in the chain that would be missing. And if that link went missing, the whole chain would collapse. So let's be very careful about that. Fishermen, small fishermen participate in the overall activity, local activity, and it's important, and they should remain. Mr. Senator, I'm here talking on this panel about fisheries and tourism. I started talking about fisheries, and I'll stick to that. If there were 1 or 2 measures that we should adopt, here are my recommendations. First of all, I would like to remind you that the 2 major integrated policies of the European Union are the Common Agricultural Policy and the Common Fisheries Policy. I do not know one professional category other than the farmers and the fishermen who, for the last 30 years, have made that many efforts in order to adapt and adjust to the European standards. They've made a lot of efforts, farmers and fishermen. And we have to pay tribute to the fishermen, particularly from our region. We should really pay tribute to what they've done for the last 30 years. And the EU should recognize that, because it is essential for the European Commission to take a stronger stance vis-à-vis the UK. We can't leave the situation as it stands. It would be a way, I think, for the Commission to say thank you to the French fishermen, because they've done what they had to do, over and beyond Brexit, over and beyond the Brexit crisis that they will have to overcome. There's a third element that will also be a source of friction, which is what we call the famous Green Deal. The Green Deal will further strengthen the feeling of anger in fishermen. Some fishermen are ready to adjust to the situation, but it's a further source of stress. So it is essential for the European Commission to pay attention to what is happening to the fisheries economy, particularly in France. And the EU should send some strong signals, adopt a stronger stance, and implement tools not for oversight or supervision, because it's not its remit, but of support to fisheries. And in particular, for a number of years, the mayor of Boulogne, the president of the region, my predecessor, the Commission of European Affairs, and myself, we've asked the Commission to open in Boulogne-sur-Mer, or on the Opal Coast anyway, an office that would support European fishermen. That would be a strong signal that the Commission and European Union are supporting fisheries and fishermen. Thank you very much. I was listening to you, and I realized that I know what's wrong. I'm British, but as you said, I'm French at the same time. I'm a European citizen. I spent half of my time looking at Sky News, BBC, and BFM TV at the same time. They keep talking about the Queen and the royal family, and it's of interest to a British citizen. Anyway, I watch both these types of channels. And on the issue of fisheries, I don't think I've ever seen a documentary on Sky News on the issue of French fishermen and vice versa. On BFM, I never saw the point of view of English fishermen, of British fishermen. It's not been covered. So we have 1 minute left, only one. So it's a rhetorical question, maybe. Maybe it's a communication issue, isn't it, for journalists? Somebody on Sky News could have established contact with someone who he could call in France, and every time there would be problems on fisheries, the floor should not be just given to the British fishermen, not just them should express their views, but someone who would also represent French fisheries, and vice versa. On the BBC, you could hear the French and vice versa. Maybe it's a communication issue. I listened to you very carefully, and I realized that everything I know about French fisheries is because I watch a French channel, and all I know about English fisheries is when I watch British channels. There's a problem of communication. I'm a journalist, I should know what I'm talking about, but I think that deep down there's a lack of understanding or some fundamental ignorance of the interests and stakes of the fishermen on both sides. I agree with you, we're not good at all when it comes to communication. We're always sort of on the defensive, take a defensive stance, and we're not really supported by the authorities here. Journalists always take the picture that will have the strongest impact, and sometimes in bad faith. So we're not good. And we have to highlight and showcase our best practices, because there are some good practices out there, but people just don't know. We're trying to get messages across constantly, but we're not very good at communicating. The only fisherman I saw recently on TV was this guy who wasn't wearing a shirt. We saw him a lot on Sky News, and he's the only guy we saw there, bare-chested, and it became viral. I'm not going to, remove my shirt. Well, to finish the roundtable discussion, that would be quite a feat. Thank you very much. I think that our speakers and participants need a warm round of applause. Thank you for your kind suggestions and proposals. I think we've covered all the issues. Thank you, Mr. Sagna. You may now leave us. Thank you for your virtual presence. And we're right on time. We're right on time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm not going to shake hands with you. You can't do that anyway. And we're shaking hands virtually. We will now start with our last panel discussion now, which will be devoted to a highly sensitive issue. If you watch it on Facebook, Twitter, or the dedicated channel, you could always send us your suggestions or questions. I always ask the questions to the different speakers, so we'll have the last panel discussion that is dedicated to the migration emergency and, of course, to the Touquet agreements. We have a lot of speakers who will speak remotely for this panel discussion. You could discover the speakers here. We have Pierre-Henri Dumont, we have Xavier Roffer, François-Xavier Bellamy, Renaud Girard, Elspeth Guild, and Jean-Marc Puissot. And I'll ask the mayor to please join us here. And they will be the sous-préfet, Frédéric Samson. Monsieur Samson and Daniel Pascal could also come and sit with us, maybe. The mayor of Le Touquet, you're coming on your own? Need any help? You need me to change seats? I'll invite you to all sit down. No assigned seating.
D'accord. Mais un intervalle de quoi? De 5 minutes ou de 2 secondes? Un intervalle de 2 secondes, 5 minutes. Je crois que vous êtes les deux seuls en présentiel, à part Monsieur le maire et...
Only two of you here. We have Mr. Sampson and the mayor, and all the others are speaking to us and participating in this meeting remotely. Mr. Mayor, I believe that you will take part in this discussion, in this debate. Perfect. So I believe that we have the other guests remotely. Maybe you could see their picture and names on the screen. So let me tell you who will be with us remotely, and maybe I'll call them when they have things to say, rather than having a quick roundtable discussion. François-Xavier Bellamy, who's a member of European Parliament, is with us, and we could see them. I can't see François-Xavier, but he's probably around. We have Professor Elspeth Guild. Professor Guild, you're the only lady. Thank you very much for being with us.
Smiling. We
also have with us Xavier Roffer. You are Xavier Roffer. You're a criminologist and essayist, crime expert. We also have with us Pierre-Henri Dumont. He's a member of Parliament for Pas-de-Calais. He's a rapporteur for the opinion on immigration, asylum, and immigration. We have with us Jean-Marc Puissot, who's the president of the ports of Calais and Boulogne. You are with us, smiling. Yes, exactly. Yes, definitely. Me smiling. I recognized you. And Renaud Girard, you're a journalist at Le Figaro, a geopolitician, and international relations at Sciences Po. That's what you teach. Renaud Girard, you're probably the person with a wonderful ceiling above you. We'll give them a round of applause. There are, of course, a few participants in this room. We have to abide by very stringent health conditions, but there were 4,000 participants and watching us on the different platforms this morning, and where we're broadcasting this conference live in both languages. I don't know if François-Xavier Bellamy is already with us. I know him because I did a TV program with him, so I know what he looks like. He was attending the Fisheries Commission meeting yesterday, so I definitely know who he is. I don't know if you followed our discussions, but I shall ask you to take the floor for about 4 or 5 minutes each, so that we understand your basic take on the issue of the migratory emergency. Professor Hild.
Which would you prefer?
C'est très bien en français. Je vais commencer en français, mais après, je vais
I shall start in French, but then I'll move to English. Fine. Okay. In 5 minutes, could you tell us about your position? I decided to start with you because you have a rather provocative point of view. So let's hear you. Well, thank you very much to the organizers for this kind invitation to your conference, which is most interesting so far and covering very significant issues. I have 3 points that I would like to make, and they're perfectly in line with Mr. Barnier's presentation this morning. So let me sketch out the 3 points. We need more sound. We're having a hard time hearing you here on stage.
Increase the volume. C'est bien. Continuez. Merci. Parfait.
Oui, ça va?
C'est mieux.
Can you hear me better? Yes. So as I said, my 3 points actually are in line with what was said by Mr. Barnier this morning. So 3 points on migration and asylum issues. We've had cooperation between the two countries since 1991 with the Sandgate Agreement. The Sandgate Agreement back in 1991 was based on the basis of the Dublin Agreement that was signed in 1990. And there's a sharing of responsibilities within the European Union for asylum seekers. That's what was laid out in this agreement. So it was a great act of shared sovereignty. And on this basis of shared sovereignty for the protection of refugees, this was enshrined by the Dublin Convention, as I said. And this was also done against the backdrop of the Maastricht Agreement in 1981. Yes, I think it was signed in 1981. Anyway, according to this, we have a take on migratory issues as an issue of shared sovereignty. So immigration issues are shared sovereignty amongst the different member states of the European Union. Secondly, the vote of the Brexit on the Brexit in 2016 was a vote by the British citizens. British citizens decided to repatriate the sovereignty to England, sovereignty over these issues in England. As Mr. Barnier explained very well this morning, the Brits decided no longer to participate in this shared sovereignty scheme of the European Union. And this was amongst one of the most important considerations that led to the Brexit. So the Brits repatriated their sovereignty on this issue. And this is something that was done indeed. Third point, if British sovereignty is no longer shared sovereignty or sovereignty shared with the other member states as part of the Dublin Agreement on the migration and asylum related issues, what will happen with French sovereignty and sovereignty regarding human rights? What will happen then? If the Brits stay in France and manage 2 detention centers in Calais and Dover for asylum seekers, if they continue to exercise responsibilities for oversight of migrants on the French territory, is that a possibility? Isn't that absurd? It's no longer, we're no longer talking about sharing of sovereignty as members of the European Union following the 1990 Dublin Agreement. The agreement was in fact renewed in 2018 by Mr. Maire. It was the Touquet Agreement, and this was done on the basis of continuation of the participation of England to the common policy of the European Union. The Brits engaged in this cooperation and trade agreement, and as per this agreement, they decided no longer to participate in this common asylum policy. So what will happen then with this French sovereignty, which is no longer shared with Europe, with England, and the Brits now have to exercise their sovereign powers, their British sovereign powers, but on French territory. there's a real issue here. There's a real problem. Somebody has to think about how to solve it. And it seems to me that we have a deep problem of responsibility when it comes to human rights, international law, and when it comes to issues of sovereignty. Whose sovereignty? I continued in English because I felt fairly comfortable. Well, thank you. Thank you, Elspeth. Elspeth had said that she was hesitant, wasn't sure whether she should speak French, but there was no problem understanding her. We have François-Xavier Bellamy joining us. He's a member of the European Parliament, and we worked together in the past. Welcome back, and I would like to have your take, your point of view on migration issues as part of this conference. What is your position? What is your approach? Tell me more. Tell us more about it. What should we change after Brexit? What should we keep? What should we change? And you have 5 minutes. Hello, Alex. Hello, everyone. I would like, first of all, to thank you for your kind invitation. I would like to thank Daniel Fasquelle, more specifically. Very sorry not to be able to physically attend the conference in Le Touquet, but I was happy and delighted to be able to share your work, particularly on this migration issue, which is fundamental. Let me say, however, that I'm not a specialist. I'm a rapporteur on the negotiation that is taking place with the UK on fisheries issues, what happened before the Brexit and what is happening now. And I now can interpret the agreement that has been signed. We have a lot of issues that we're looking into together with members of the European Parliament and the British Parliament, and this is an issue. We know that there's fisheries, but we also have migration issues, and they have something in common. They were both, migration and fisheries, crucial as part of the negotiations. We know that the public opinion was determined in favor of Brexit because of the migration issues too. European migration policy was harshly criticized, and the Brits really wanted to regain their sovereignty on these issues. As the previous speaker said, she was absolutely right. The question has not been solved. And there are two issues on which we need to work and work together with the Brits. And we need to work also across the whole of Europe. First of all, a border cooperation with the Brits. That's of the major significance. We know that the current situation is not satisfactory, and we can see the tragedies that happen regularly with people crossing the channel. We also have the terrible situation of people in the Hauts-de-France. They suffer the direct impact of these migratory flows that we do not manage to control and to manage. And this is making our life and the life of a number of residents very, very difficult. The Touquet agreements were at the heart of the conversations that took place in the course of this conference. And I really think that it is very important to put these subjects back on the table to secure cooperation that will be effective. We can't be satisfied with this situation where France becomes the external service provider of the UK for the control of its borders. This situation creates a tension that could not be solved if we can't manage to set up a partnership that is fair, effective and operational. And the issue of Brexit hasn't solved anything. We could see that the migratory issue was central for public opinion at the time of the discussion today. The question has not been settled. We need to start a conversation on the issue of the renegotiation of the Touquet agreements. And this is indispensable, very much needed to be able to build a future relationship that would be as peaceful as possible. I agree with this objective, and I share this wish with Elspeth, who said something about this. We need to find some sound cooperation with the Brits. And unfortunately, the migration issue could remain a pain point, a source of misunderstanding and mistrust. If we can't discuss concretely, peacefully, with a high ambition and frankness and openness, we can no longer end up in a situation where the United Kingdom outsources the management of its border. We have to have a shared responsibility around the channel. We owe it to people who are directly the victims of this migration crisis, people who are the first impacted, the victims, those who are made vulnerable by this situation, so who cross the channel and sometimes lose their lives. And we owe it also to the populations that are the most vulnerable and that are strongly hit by the continuation of this unsolved problem.
The EU also has a major responsibility. I firmly believe that if the EU is not able to set up a proper response to the migrant crisis, then it might seriously damage it. The immigration crisis is not behind us, it is ahead of us, and it's only the beginning. Today, the EU does not have a migration policy that is robust enough to guarantee that people can't live in Europe without having been authorized to do so. And this is the entire issue about European sovereignty for the future. Of course, we need to continue to welcome the people who are eligible for asylum. And asylum is part of our values in Europe, but it's not the same to welcome someone who needs European help and to not know who's even moving into Europe. And today we're in this fragile situation, this dangerous situation, which is, and the whole issue is visible in the border between France and the UK. Basically, the issues in the Mediterranean are visible in Calais. We've seen a defiance of Europe in the Brexit vote. We've seen tension between the UK and France. And we've also seen an inability of Europe to manage its own borders. I think it is important to support the French Agency for Border Guards and Coast Guards to support Frontex with their director, so that European states have the means to protect their own borders. And it's important that we are consistent with our goals and that we're not making the agency more fragile, more vulnerable, as we're supposed to be supporting and strengthening it. It's important that we control the external borders of Europe, the border between Greece and Turkey and the Mediterranean. And if we aren't able to control these borders, we're going to see an increase in tensions within the EU and also between the UK and the EU. And this is the challenge we're facing, and it's not just about the UK and the EU, it's a migration crisis, but I think I've already gone a bit over time. So Alex Taylor, the floor's back for you. You're always a great source of reactions on social media, and we'll get back to those in a minute. But continuing around. Xavier, you are an essay writer and a criminologist. What is your opinion on the Touquet agreements and the immigration crisis? Back in the day, it was a British man, Wainwright, who headed up Europol. And back then, I was part of an expert group at Europol that provided criminology advice to effectively the European police force, or at least for the coordination of the European police forces. So I'd like now to discuss something that's underlying, that's not talked about enough. And that is human trafficking. There are two main flows, as you know. There are people coming in from the Middle East, beyond Iraq and Afghanistan, come in through the Eastern Mediterranean and then get to the Greek islands. And then the larger immigration flow is from Africa, and Nigeria, Central Africa, and they cross the African country towards the north through Libya, and then they cross from Libya to Italy. On TV, you'll see pictures of people crammed onto rotting dinghies trying to cross the Mediterranean, which isn't an easy crossing. And we know how many people die at sea every month. We're talking 2,000 per year. We also see images of the camps that they get crammed into when they arrive in Europe, and then we don't know what happens after that. But even 500 years before Jesus Christ, Aristotle told us that you never see a force, you only see its effects. You don't see the wind, but you see the branches that move. So there are hundreds of millions of men, women, and children often leaving from somewhere and going somewhere else. And those of them who arrive in Europe and who end up in northern France to the border where we are today, not 3% of them decided themselves to leave and got here through their own means, through Libya and through Europe, Turkey and Greece. We know that it's not possible that they got here on their own. 2 or 3 years ago, 2 years I think, the head of military intelligence in France, the man who controls the observation satellites, did a very clear expose at the Military Academy for Experts. So this isn't top secret or anything. He said this publicly. He said that they have satellites that can see what's going on in the Sahara. There are thousands of kilometers between Nigeria to Libya, and a human being can't do that on their own, even if they have a car. There are roads, there are stocks of water, there are fuel dumps, there are people, there are guides. There's an entire logistics setup that leads people to Libya. The satellites see the boats as well. And the satellites see the odd traffic going on with NGOs who sometimes end up being taxis taking people from the ocean to the coast, through Spain maybe if they came in through Morocco. And this is true of the African flows and the Middle Eastern flows. And these people are some of the most dangerous criminals on the planet. One of the networks that gets people through the Middle East to Turkey are Islamic State military units who blur the line between militants and gangsters and often kill the people that they are shipping. So there is human trafficking, and the least that can be said is that Europe has not provided a decent answer to this human trafficking problem. On the little boats that the people across the Mediterranean use, the gangsters know that the people on their boats have their life savings with them. And as they're starving, they get sold boxes, cans of sardines for 200 euros or a bottle of water for 100 euros to fleece them of their life savings that they're bringing with them. The African migrants that get to Libya are sometimes traded on slave markets, such as in the darkest times of African slavery. They get eyed up for how fit they are, and then they are put to work in fields. I think that the human trafficking component of this is not being taken into account as it should be, the criminal side of human trafficking. The people who get all the way to us, where we are today, are mostly 95% of them are the victims of modern-day human trafficking, and that is how the European Union should see them. Just a question, who's not taking the criminal side of this serious enough? Yes, the European Union. Europol does not have the means to address the issue. This is a political issue, and there's no political will. All of the political willpower is going into the humanitarian side of things. It's good to help people, it's good to host them. But if we could avoid them being trafficked in the first place, if we could avoid them falling into basically slavery, then it would be even better. Pierre-Henri Dumont, you are MP for the Pas-de-Calais, so you know this issue well. And you're also a rapporteur for the immigration courts. We've heard your opinion. What do you have to say to the people who've already spoken? Good afternoon, everyone. Hello to Daniel Fasquelle, who was with me at the Parliament not that long ago. And I can see from this beautiful city why he wanted to come back and be mayor again. Let's do an update on Calais, because I am MP for Calais, and we traveled to Sahara, North Africa, and we saw the migrants as they moved through Africa. From the get-go, Brexit was not an opportunity to renegotiate agreements such as the Touquet Agreement. And by this, I mean from the perspective of the French government, but as an event that's completely separate from migration. And that's a big problem. Your first speaker mentioned that the Touquet agreements were negotiated when the UK was part of the EU, with some rules that would be applicable, such as the Dublin Convention. But here we're in an environment that no longer matches the situation in which the agreement was signed. I think that the Touquet agreements are not really migration agreements. They're actually economical agreements. The reason why the Sangatte protocol was created and the Touquet agreements were signed were to guarantee the fluidity of traffic through Calais and through the tunnel. When you get on the Eurostar in Paris, when you get on the shuttle, or if you get on the ferry in Calais, once you get out of the station or out of the port on the other side, there are no controls anymore. So the heart of the Touquet agreement is to protect that border area. That then led to migration agreements, because the border controls led to border agents and police forces, with French police on the British side and vice versa. But this is mostly about politics, political willpower. We're not here to strike down the Touquet agreement, because I think that it's vital to maintain the fluidity of traffic, and any future government or any renegotiation of the Touquet agreements or anything else would need to guarantee the free flow of traffic and therefore maintain the border controls in UK and in France. But we do need to be bold enough to make the British understand their responsibility on the migration crisis. No agreement could change the fact that the UK is an island, which simply makes it much easier to get to France from Africa or the Middle East. It makes it much easier to travel through land countries than it is to travel the British Channel, which is the second most dense sea Detroit in the world in terms of traffic. So if someone arrives in Calais and wants to cross over to the UK, that's because they believe that a better life is waiting for them over there. somebody from Sudan already speaks the UK, already speaks English. They know that there's a Sudanese community over there that they could join, or an Eritrean community that they could join, and we don't really have those communities here in France. They think that their life will be better, and they think that not being that the more lax labor laws and fewer ID controls would be better for them. No, it's not so much fewer ID controls, it's that British people don't have an ID card. They only have passports for when they travel abroad. British people do not need to bring ID even when they vote. And illegal work. We've seen the pictures of the illegal factories in Leicester, for example, make it easier to live off the grid in the UK. And even when the UK was part of the EU, they didn't comply with the Dublin Accord, and they're even less likely to do now because it's no longer binding. And I think that the UK needs to take its responsibility. Now, this might be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. The UK is doing to France what Europe is doing to Turkey at a different scale, but it's the same thing. The UK is giving money to France, then Macron travels to Sandhurst to ask for 50 million more for barbed wire fences and drones and people. And then he comes back and says, we got more money. And then Mrs. Patel comes to Calais and inspects the vehicles that were bought with British money. But that's not how it can really work. That's not how it should work. When you look at the fact that the UK processes 5 times less asylum applications than France, that's something, yes, that's something that people don't realize. As a British person myself, a French person can't really say this, but the British tend to think that everyone wants to go to England. Everyone wants to get over, and you'll read that in British papers, and the British believe that everyone is climbing over themselves to travel to the UK. But what they don't realize is that there are many more applications for asylum in France than in the UK. And that's for a very simple reason, is that to ask for asylum in the UK, you need to be in the UK. And so long as we don't allow people to request asylum in the UK in embassies or elsewhere, then they're still going to be victims of the human traffickers, and they're going to be part of the dozens of bodies that we fish out of the channel. The issue that we have in Calais is that even if we go and see them and ask them to ask for asylum in France, they don't want to, because they would rather live off the grid in the UK than ask for asylum in France. So if they could get a definitive no from the UK government as they approach the UK, then maybe we could keep them out of the hands of the human traffickers. Moving on to Jean-Marc Puissesseau, chairman of the ports in Calais. This is, of course, important to you. Mr. Puissesseau, make sure you unmute your microphone. Okay, from the top again. Good afternoon, everyone. As you just said, I am the chairman of the Boulogne and Calais ports, and I would like to thank the French state, Ministries for Culture and the border guards for having maintained the ports in functioning order to help unload fish regularly in the Boulogne port and to keep things flowing normally. So that's first of all. And I would also like to say that I agree with everything that has been said by the panel so far. I hope that the fishermen who have not yet got licenses will get them soon. And we also have the issue with Scotland. There are big fishing boats that are unloading in Denmark and they need to be shipped all the way from Denmark to France. And I hope that the British will get vets present in ports as soon as possible so that we can rectify the situation. And also, the lady who spoke earlier and everyone else, I completely agree with you on the human side of things. We have lorries being loaded onto ships with people hiding on the boats, and the issue costs millions and also seriously damages our reputation as well. There are lots of migrants in Calais who are only there to get over to the UK. And we are victims of the Touquet Agreement. We employ 200 people. The Calais port employs 200 people just to check lorries. And I'm glad that you're holding this in Touquet, because the Touquet agreements require us to check every HGV that leaves Calais. It's true that the British have spent money to put horrible fences or hedges or whatever along the motorway. We spend 8 million per year to check whether there are migrants on the lorries. Today, the UK has decided to leave the EU, and I have already told the ambassador, when he was kind enough to come and visit me at the end of 2020 to ask how Brexit was going, I said that I would no longer check the lorries for free in Calais. I know that Mr. Bertrand, the president of the region, agrees with me as well. It is vital that this issue be addressed quickly, because I will no longer spend 8 million per year to do Boris Johnson's work, who now has taken over his border again. Well, he should take over the British border in Calais. And if we are doing his work, then he should pay us for it. I'm not going to say that we're going to stop checking the lorries on the 1st of May, but if we don't get any reaction from Paris or from London, any indication that they're going to look at how much this is costing, then things are going to change. And I think that we are likely to stop checking the lorries in Calais, with whatever consequences that may lead to. And I'll take responsibility for that. We need to look at the migration situation. Well, that was 5 minutes, a very interesting 5 minutes. I wish that I was recording that. I would have retweeted it immediately. I think many people in the UK would have been interested in that. Well, I hope that you will take up this message, and listening to this round table, it seems that I'm not the only one to think this. And when I discussed this with the ambassador, I certainly get the impression that people agree with me and that we're on the same page. And we're not here to see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. So we can get back to what you just said, but let's finish with Renaud Girard. You are a journalist, a geopolitician, and specialist in international relations, teaching at Sciences Po. It's fantastic that we have someone from an academic circle to rack up this round table. What do you have to say on what you heard up until now? Well, I'm not an academic per se. I'm more a journalist before I am an academic. I work for the Figaro newspaper, and I've worked a lot on a lot of the wars that occur in the regions that we've already mentioned. Been working on the migrant crisis for 35 years. Every Tuesday, I write the international column in the Figaro. And last Tuesday, I talked about the new alliance between Iran and China. But yes, on top of that, I do also teach a class on international strategy to the young students at the Political Science Institute in Paris. I would like to thank the Mayor of Touquet for having invited me to this symposium, and I've already learned a lot listening to you all. I don't live in your region, I'm from Paris, but I certainly feel a lot of solidarity with the chaos that has befallen the beautiful region in the north of France. I've been there many times. I know Touquet well, and Calais as well in its region. And the people in the north of France are in no way responsible for what happened to them, is happening to them, and may well continue to happen. It's the consequence of mismanagement at an international level and national level of the border issues even. There's been a lax attitude when it comes to managing European borders, and it's also the direct consequence of a migration policy that's completely out of control. Xavier Lefebvre was truly correct in bringing up the human trafficking aspect of the migration crisis, which is terrible. But there's also another consequence of human trafficking, which is that the people who are traveling away are the people who are in the best health and who have the most proactive attitude, so to speak, because to undertake traveling to Europe, you need to pay a lot of money, you need to have a lot of energy. Only the very last bit is done by NGOs taking people from the ocean to the coast. But getting to the Libyan coast and getting onto a dinghy can cost between 3,000 to 4,000 euros. You've got entire families pooling their money. Mainly it's young men. There are women and children as well, but most of them are young men. And they then travel to what they hope will be a European El Dorado. And it's not the poorest people who are making the crossing. We're talking about people who were able to scrounge together that significant amount of money to begin with. It would have been much better if that money had been spent at home investing in agriculture, for example, because Africa's big issue today is, of course, its population situation. We're going to be looking at 2 billion Africans soon, but agriculture isn't keeping up to feed them. The weather is good enough to have great agricultural production in Africa, but there simply isn't the investment in production. So you've got this brain drain. You've got this brain drain of Africans who are the most go-getting, the most entrepreneurial Africans, who are then spending their life savings in the countries that they're going.
You also mentioned the asylum right. What is that? Well, that was invented by the French Revolution. To allow those who were living under despotic Europe at the end of the 18th century, but were sharing the values of the French Republic and were persecuted because of that, to allow them to come and be protected in France under the French Republic. So the asylum right is a right for individuals, for people, not for groups of people. Because otherwise, that means that any country that's at war should instantly have all its citizens leave. And now we just heard that President Biden announced the withdrawal of the American troops from Afghanistan. So if Taliban go back to Afghanistan, does that mean that all Afghan people should leave their country? Should 30 million people decide to go elsewhere because of the asylum right? They have the right to come to Europe. Of course, here I'm exaggerating. And this would be preposterous. So we need an individual asylum right. And also political asylum right for those who share Europe's values or French values at the time. Or British values for those who wish to go to Britain. But the asylum right is definitely not an economic right. There's a third issue in Europe, and the people from the Touquet or from Calais know that very well, and they suffer the consequences of it. Chancellor Merkel in 2015 really led to a huge wave of migration from Africa or the Middle East when she said that 800,000 people, 800,000 refugees would be welcomed in Germany with free housing, education for children, access to health, education, work, and so on. When she made that announcement in 2015, she didn't consult any of her European partners. She didn't even consult her own ministers or members of parliament at the Bundestag when she took that unilateral decision, when she made a statement leading to an unbelievable wave that's still not finished. She was basically saying, come to Europe, you will be welcome here. She didn't ask her people's agreement, nor her parliament. And that's very interesting because a few years before that, Angela Merkel said multiculturalism does not work. That was an observation she made. And then she decided to change her policy completely, decided to pivot without consulting anyone, and we all know the consequences of that. Now, some people may want, and in France, for instance, there are people, and there are newspapers as well, who do support multicultural societies and who do want multiculturalism, but that's not everyone. And the point of democracy is to have everyone. Sorry, I need to interrupt you there. Thank you for your introduction. Sorry, but we are not going to have Elspeth anymore with us in 5 minutes time, so I need to give her the floor. Sorry, if I just may finish my sentence. When you live in a democracy, the citizens should have the right to pick the type of society they want. Do they want multiculturalism or not? And we have had referendums on plenty of topics in France and the UK, referendums on different topics, but never on multiculturalism, to ask whether the people in Hauts-de-France, for example, what kind of society they want to live in. And that should be really the bare minimum of democracy. Elspeth, I know you have to leave in a few minutes. I'd like to hear you, first of all, because you're the only woman, but because you're also the only Brit, apart from me. So what's your reaction to what Mr. Puissesseau said? I'll try and say it in a nutshell. Why do the French deal with this? Why do they not just say, let the Brits deal with it? It's not our problem anymore. Why should we, French taxpayers, pay to protect our borders? To protect Boris Johnson's borders, even. Sorry, that's not exactly what I said. We are paying 8 million euros for the operational account of the harbour. 8 million euros in costs of the harbour, not of the taxpayers. 4 checks for the UK. In 3 weeks, we'll have a new harbour that will be finished. That's the main maritime job of the last year. 700 million euros in works. And 8 million in costs is what we have to pay for the British borders. Elspeth. 3 points I'd like to raise. First of all, thank you for the floor. First of all, we don't have this problem between France and Germany or France and Belgium, only between France and Britain. Why? Well, because Britain never wanted to participate in Schengen. They never wanted to be part of Schengen. So if we have this terrible situation of disarray between regions, it is because of the Schengen situation. We don't have that in Strasbourg. According to the last Frontex report, over 300 million people crossed the external border of the EU every year. Is that normal? It's a bit lower in 2020 because of COVID-19, but 300 million people enter the EU every year. How many people arrive illegally, according to Frontex? 200,000.
Face à 300 millions, qu'est-ce que c'est cette histoire?
200,000, so that's 0.005% compared to 300 million people. And we focus on illegal migrants. So why spending that much money on this?
Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Quand on a moins de 200 000 personnes par an, selon Frontex.
So why are we spending so much money on Frontex when under 200,000 people are arriving illegally compared to 300 million legally? So why do they need so much money? Third point I'd like to raise. Very sorry, I'm a law professor and I have to give class in 5 minutes actually, so I will have to leave. I'm a professor at university in the UK, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and elsewhere. France is a party to the Refugee Convention of 1951 and its protocol of 67. So that means that, yes, the definition of who is a refugee is written in Article 1 of the Convention, shared together with the UK, all the member states of the EU, and over 100 countries in the entire world. So I'm sorry, but your explanation of who is a refugee is not the definition in the convention that France signed in Article 1 of the Geneva Convention. It's a very interesting discussion. So would you agree for the EU to welcome the entire Afghan population because there's a war in Afghanistan? Is that your position? Well, that's a question that doesn't even deserve an answer because the entire population of Afghanistan is not going to come to Europe. Most Afghan refugees are in Pakistan and in Iran. And if you checked the UNHCR statistics, it's very clear. It's clearly stated. And even in horrible persecution situations, only a small minority of the population is allowed to come and is allowed to seek protection elsewhere. The entire population of Germany is allowed to live and go to France whenever they want. Does that mean that 80 million people go to France? No, but they have the absolute right of coming to France, but they don't do that. Sorry, I know you have to join your class. Yes, I do apologize. I have to leave. I have to interrupt you all anyway. I know I'm sorry about the limited amount of time we have this roundtable on such an important topic, but that's the case for any roundtable anyway. Sorry, we only have 10 minutes left. And some people need to leave because there's a curfew here in France. So I'll give you 1 minute all to conclude and to react to what you heard during that roundtable. If you want to say anything in particular, now is the time. And I know I can count on my friend François Xavier to conclude in 1 minute. Please say what you have to say in 1 minute. François Xavier, the floor is yours. Thank you, Alex. In 1 minute, I think it's a major topic. And yes, here, the future of the EU is at stake and its relationship with the UK as well. You're right in saying that today, there aren't a lot of illegal people coming to the EU from third countries, but like I was saying earlier on, the migration crisis is, I'm convinced, that in front of us and not behind us. It still lies in front of us. The pure demographic reality of the situation between the EU, Middle East, and Africa cannot be controlled. And we know that our European societies already have multiple divisions. And obviously, all the Germans will not want to come and live in France tomorrow, because the reality of the living conditions means that there's no difference really between Germany and France, that there's no attractiveness. But it's very clear that if we can't control our borders, the EU will not have a political future. And I'm not saying that to say that our borders should be opaque walls that are impenetrable, but I just want to say that any political reality starts, that was Patton said, by defining who is a member of your society and who is not. So I think here the topic is to rebuild our ability to make political decisions, and that's what we're lacking today. Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Sue. 1 minute. Please unmute your microphone because we cannot hear you. Yes, sorry. I'm used to muting my microphone to make sure that there's no interferences. Anyway, I'd just like to say that I hope that what I said is not going to disappear into the void at the end of this seminar. I thank you for this discussion. It was a very interesting discussion. I hope the political representatives present here today will address this topic. This issue should go all the way up to the president of the French Republic, because we can't continue like that. You talked about the migrants and the economic consequences. When we had the jungle in Calais, we had over 10,000 refugees. It cost 1.5 million passenger lost to the Calais harbors. So there are also economic consequences that are dramatic. So I do hope that my statement is not going to be forgotten in the void of this seminar. Thank you. Well, we need to hear you more in the British media.
I say always, even if I don't get the question, and give my answer to this problem.
Merci beaucoup. Renaud Girard, désolé, mais 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Renaud Girard. Sorry, but 1 minute. I think our young British colleague should go and walk in African towns like I did, to merely observe that all young Afghans want to go to Europe. They see their future as being in Europe. Their goal is to get the needed money to be able to go to Europe. I spent some time recently in Africa as well, and also in equatorial Africa, to be precise. And most of the young males there also only want one thing. They want to go to Europe. That is seen as a fantasy, as an El Dorado. So that is a problem that is still in front of us, and that should be managed much more seriously than it was in past years, with clear borders once more and compliance with the law, because people still have the right to say how they want to live and who is allowed to go live with them and who is not. I think that if governments don't do this, the consequences, the political consequences in Europe will be extraordinary. We already had such a consequence with Britain. I was deeply saddened when I heard that the UK would leave the EU, because I feel close to the British. And they did that because of the migrant crisis and the cultural insecurity in Europe, because people tend to focus on the economy, but there's not only the economy in life. Cultural insecurity is also important. We are not merely economic beings. So mass migration led to cultural insecurity, and I invite my British colleague to go walk in the outskirts of Paris, for instance. Just go right on the other side of the Paris ring, and you'll see what the situation's like. Just go there. And I hope governments will address this issue to free this region of the Touquet and of Calais, free it from its problems that it's facing. Thank you, Mr. Girard. Sorry for interrupting you, but we are running out of time. I'd like to give the floor to the mayor for the conclusion. Mr. Rowe, for 1 minute. Yes, I think it would be a mistake to think that it's only a problem of a few kilometers of coast, a few million euros, and a few hundreds of people who are trying to cross the border from one coast to another. No, it's much more than that. It's a transcontinental issue. We are here dealing with human traffickers that are as rich as drug traffickers. And there's a lot of corruption there as well. And if we only look at that issue from a particular small lens, then we are going to make issues even worse. When you're facing a serious disease, you should not just ignore it, because you might die from it. Thank you. Mr. Dumont, 1 minute, please. 3 points. First of all, on Brexit. Brexit means that the UK is not part of the Dublin Agreement anymore. So the issue of non-accompanied minors and family grouping is also not part of the British text anymore, of British law. So if we want to solve the issue in Calais, especially for the young people, we need to find new legislation in Britain to re-implement those two questions. Then there's also Frontex. So Xavier Bellamy mentioned Frontex earlier on. European Coast Guard Agency. I think that if Frontex exists and is strengthened, we need them to be present in Calais as well, because we are now a border, an external border of the EU. So Frontex should also protect those people from the human traffickers networks. And third point, what happens if we decide to not control the borders anymore? Well, I think 3 things would happen. First of all, attractiveness would attract a lot of people. If there are not any checks in the Calais border, for instance, in the Calais harbor, for instance, we know that much more people will go there because of the human traffickers networks. Second of all, follow what Pierre Patel said, we'll have the pushback strategy in the UK, just as there is in Australia. And in the summer of 2020, the British minister wanted the Royal Navy to be deployed in the Channel. So we need, of course, to avoid that situation. There was also a question of wave-building machines at some point in a strange report. The third issue that's raised is to know whether people who go illegally to the UK would not be automatically sent back to France. So that would actually lead to nothing, but only increasing the issue in France anyway. Okay, thank you. I know that you all wanted to say much more than that, but I had to interrupt you. I'm very sorry. The roundtable was very interesting, but we're already 2 minutes over the planned time. Thank you very much. Sorry for not having too much time to speak. And thank you for being present remotely as well. And I will now give the floor to Frédéric Sanson and especially to Daniel Fasquelle. Thank you very much for welcoming us in your beautiful town. I'd like to give a round of applause to Alex Taylor because he really moderated the debate very well. Thank you, dear Alex. I'd like to thank all speakers and say that this seminar is a great success. We had several thousands of people following this conference, 4,500 this morning to be precise, and so I think in the entire day we will have had over 10,000 people watching. And of course, this conference will also be watchable on replay on our Facebook page or elsewhere. So this seminar will still be live after today. Thank you to our technical teams as well in this Palais des Congrès, this beautiful town of Le Touquet-Paris-Plage, a great new conference center. So thank you very much, all technicians who enabled us to organize this day in the best possible conditions. I'll be brief. I would just like to give you a 5-minute conclusion. Brexit is both a violent poison and a slow poison as well. Violent, because of course it's the departure of one of the European Union member states. It never happened before. And that was an unprecedented shock for all of us. Since 1951, 1957, there's been European construction. We were always making progress within that construction. We were reaching new steps, and now we are actually going back. So that is very violent, if you think of it. But it's also a slow poison. It's a poison that's partly very visible because of the departure of a state, but it's also invisible. And slow, invisible poisons are the most dangerous poisons. They are the ones that you should be the most careful about. It's a slow poison for the relationship between the UK and the EU. We didn't talk about that today, but what I'm most concerned about is the issue of standards. Very simply, because there's great ambiguity at the core of the agreement that was negotiated. The Brits want to take back their independence. Very well. They don't want to be under Brussels umbrella anymore. Very well. But they still want to have access to the single market. So there's the ambiguity. So in the agreement, it's written that if you want to have access to the single market, you need to have the same standards as the European standards. Whether they have the same standards as the European Union, they will have done all of this for nothing. Whether they move away from European standards, they will struggle to have access to the single market. If they choose that path, I think it will be very complicated for the good relationships between the UK and the EU in the future, because the EU will have to react. It will have to implement barriers obstacles to the access of British products in the single market. So that will be the starting point of a relationship that's going to worsen slowly between the EU and the UK. It's also a slow poison for the EU, though, not only for the UK. I really was shocked by the fact that we didn't fight to keep the UK in. Why did the Europeans not take the initiative? Why did they not go to London to try and find solutions with the Brits? We were just looking at this departure and without doing anything to prevent it. And after the departure as well, I'm struck by the fact that there's no reaction. It's a terrible failure for the EU, and no one is doing anything. Did we sit around a table? Did we challenge ourselves? Did we think we're going to do things differently? No. No one is thinking about a new treaty. Even though we've had a lot of treaties in the history of the EU construction. So it's also a slow poison for the EU. It's very clear regarding vaccines. The Brits act in a much brisker way. We were slower, and now we're thinking, actually, weren't the Brits right? So this poison now is already present in people's heads, in people's spirits, and it might undermine the EU. So that's why I'm very concerned by this. So in the face of poison, you need an antidote. Several antidotes. The daylight today might be one of them. And I'd say that there are two kinds of antidotes. I'm not going to elaborate on them, but we need a lot of goodwill, a lot of dialogue, a lot of exchanges. Xavier Bertrand said it this morning, he was completely right. We shouldn't try to punish the Brits because they decided to leave the EU. We shouldn't try to make the UK fail either to demonstrate that they should have stayed within the EU. No, I think we should be responsible, we should have dignity in the EU, and we should maintain a productive dialogue with our British friends like we did today to try and find solutions to all problems. The fishery issue is a main problem. We've heard it today. We need to solve it quickly because otherwise it's going to poison our relationships even further. The migration issue is also a major problem that's on the table and that we need to solve. We need to talk amongst ourselves. We need to handle issues one after another. I mean, to solve them one after another without letting them worsen. I think that's the first antidote: dialogue, discussion, exchanges. Even though the Brits are not part of the European Council table anymore, we need to keep working together and discuss with them. So that means that all people of goodwill should try and help build this relationship. And modestly here in the Touquet-Paris-Plage, the most British of the French sea resorts, we are trying to do that. This resort was built by French, but it really evolved to try and welcome a lot of Brits. So all of us need to try and act, to try and work to maintain this agreement, maintain these relationships. I said this morning that I would like a new entente cordiale between the UK and the EU. Furthermore, we also need to think urgently about the future of the EU. We can't just leave things as they are. Michel Barnier knows these topics by heart. He defined 6 priorities. He conveyed proposals. I am an academic, so the idea of having European universities is an idea that I like. He also formulated other proposals that should be studied. Others should also make proposals. France is going to chair the EU next year. Will be the presidency of the EU next year. So we need to play our role during that presidency. We should really think about the future of the European Union.
So this is what I wanted to say by way of conclusion today, but I would also like for you to pencil in a new date. I think today was absolutely great, but it shouldn't be a one-off. If we want to continue with this in-depth discussion, and if we want to maintain good quality relationship between our two countries, the European Union and Britain, we need rendezvous. It was the first time we met after the Brits had left France and Europe. We may be proud to have organized this event both in French and in English. Dear Alex, this should be a recurring event. Every year, we should organize an encounter of this type in order to draw stock from Brexit, our relationship with Great Britain, but possibly also to think about the future of the European Union. Thank you very much to all of you. It is because of you that this event was so successful. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I took notes in the course of the day. I listened very carefully to the excellent contributions to the discussion that were made one after the other, and there were many throughout today. And you're right, from this beautiful city of Le Touquet, I mean, we have a vantage point to observe what has become and will become of Brexit. We're not in Calais, we're not in Boulogne, we're not in Paris, we're in Le Touquet. In the Pas-de-Calais, this issue of Brexit takes on a very concrete dimension when we talk about the customs checks and controls at borders, when we talk about the health checks for us in the Pas-de-Calais region. This means that there are long files of trucks waiting to cross the channel, or waiting for boats in the Calais port. When we talk about the migrants, we actually see them. When we talk about migrants trying to cross the channel, we know exactly what this means. And on a daily basis, for the road transport companies, for the local residents, and what happens on the coast, because we can actually see them physically try to cross the channel. They go all the way down to Berck and even further south, all the way to Dieppe to attempt the crossing. So Brexit in Pas-de-Calais is at the front lines, if you will, very concrete, very visible. And maybe this qualifies us to make a few common sense comments at this stage. So talking about the issue of migrations, we said that we should strive to find a solution to stop this appeal. As long as there will be this appeal for migrants that will push and urge young people to spend a fortune that they will give to smugglers to attempt, to cross the channel, to live a new life across the channel. That means that they have to be on makeshift boats, and it's not the same as crossing. It's a bit the same as crossing a highway during peak hours while you're blindfolded. It's very dangerous, in other words, very hazardous. So when you get this kind of situation where you have dozens, hundreds of migrants, all focusing in going to Calais, we may wonder about what went wrong upstream. What did not work? What was mismanaged? For example, in the countries that were crossed by these migrants, maybe these countries are not diligent enough, were not careful enough with their checks. Maybe they should have been detained. Maybe they should have been deported prior to their attempts to cross the channel. So rather than focusing on Calais, possibly the French authorities should look at what's happening elsewhere, upstream of Calais. We may think that other countries are more competent to manage the issue of migration. It's not easy. When you have 70 kilometers of a coastline that you need to oversee, to supervise with limited resources, of course, the Brits are paying a small part of what it costs to oversee the coastline, but this exercise is far from being easy, nevertheless. The prefect in the Pas-de-Calais, the regional prefect, the home minister, everybody is up in arms to try to find the magic formula, or rather a formula that is as effective as possible, to make sure that as much as we can, we could fulfill, discharge our responsibility that's been entrusted to us as per the Touquet agreements, as long as the Touquet agreement is still operational. Let's remind ourselves that we're not all that bad. We keep, saying that there's too much red tape and that the French administration has failed so many times. But let's remember that this issue of the channel crossings, and that has been going on for the last 2 years, the reason why there's a development of this trend is because we were very effective when it comes to checking trucks at the entrance entrance of the tunnel and at the ports. And this is what led the smugglers' networks to actually move further afield and to try to make other arrangements to organize these crossings. So we have to get organized to be ever more effective. We have to continue with our court work, judicial work on, prosecuting the smugglers' networks. But this migration issue is seen as a very acute topic seen from here. Another big topic is the compliance with the British commitments that have been made following the Brexit agreement, particularly the issuance of licenses to our local fishermen who are eagerly expecting, have been eagerly expecting the issuance of such licenses for all too long, and the state services, public services are here to support them. The prefect, together with the sub-prefect in Boulogne, has set up an economic follow-up or monitoring committee to follow very closely on these matters, to try to identify the businesses that are struggling, to try to find solutions for them. Now, of course, there are some question marks still on tourism. What will happen with tourism? Looking into the consequences of Brexit, it's very difficult to assess them. What makes it difficult is that Brexit took place upstream or in the middle of a public health crisis that all in itself has incredible impacts on the normal functioning of our economies. And it is very difficult now to say, okay, the Brits are no longer coming to the Opal Coast and haven't been coming since last summer. Well, we know that this is first and foremost a consequence of the public health crisis. So we need to get out of the crisis before we make a sound assessment of the impact due to Brexit, as opposed to the health crisis, on British tourism on our coasts. Few words of conclusion possibly now. Let us go back to this particular tie that binds the Opal Coast and particularly our local area with our British friends. This morning and in the afternoon, we talked about the Azincourt battle, where Field Marshal Haig, and we're going to erect its statue on the Grand Place of Montreuil-sur-Mer, on the major square. And there are two other historical figures that I would like to talk about that show the sheer complexity of the relationship that exists between France and the UK and has existed. We have Robert d'Artois and Sean Connery. Sean Connery, first of all. This is not a very known fact. It's the Westminster Hotel in Le Touquet that Sean Connery signed the contract that committed him with the Albert Society, and that led him to shoot 5 or 6 James Bond movies later on. Well, he signed that professional agreement in France. So for the British identity, for the British citizens and for the Scottish citizens, this was quite a turning point. And it happened here, right opposite in the hotel in Le Touquet. The second personality is Robert d'Artois, the Red Count, or the Red Prince rather, that destroyed the Mao d'Artois castle near here. And he was hardly rewarded for his feat by the King of France. His idea was to come and offer the crown of France to King Edward III, which then later on led us to a war that lasted for 117 years between France and England. And this is a war that we have kept some kind of atavism, possibly something that could be reactivated, some long-term impact of this war. So we do have this complex relationship with the Brits. At the same time, in the Pas-de-Calais, all of these issues are very concrete questions that are very visible, that we try to grapple with in a very pragmatic fashion, in a very hands-on manner. And there are decisions that could be made at other levels too, not just locally, talking about shaping the future relations. What about the future of the Touquet Agreement? What will happen to it? We didn't talk about the defense technology, and that was one of the major aspects included in the Touquet Agreement. Again, major cooperation areas that have existed in the past between France and the UK at the time when the UK was still a member state of the European Union. Well, a conference like this one allows us to put all these subjects again on the table, to highlight and identify drivers for future action It was a great pleasure anyway for me to follow this conference with you, and I will report on all the interesting insights that were exchanged to whoever it might concern. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you, those who've participated and watched this conference. Those of you who were here, well, for health reasons, of course, there were very few people present in the room. It was scattered audience, but nevertheless, they supported us. I learned a lot during this conference. Very interesting discussions. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.